Last year's National Climate Assessment says the impacts of climate change are making intense storms more frequent and prolonging the blazes, taking over the West Coast. But what does climate change look like for the Midwest and Illinois? Experts say while the effects may not be as visible, they're here.
So if we look at Illinois in general, what we've seen is about 1.5 degree warming over time. That's not a lot, but the expectation is that's going to be more like 5 to 9 degrees by the end of the century. Also, we're already getting wetter, about 10 to 15% wetter overall, with more of the heavy rainfall events as well. So we got two things to worry about: heavier rains and higher temperatures as we move forward.
And heavy rainfall has already caused widespread flooding across the state. Chicago saw record rainfall this spring, with over 6 inches in April and 8 inches in May. The average monthly rainfall totals for May are just under 4 inches. Record-breaking totals like these are linked to problems that have become more common in the city.
And that extreme flooding is producing rising lake levels, which is causing lots of problems. We're losing some of our beaches. It's causing problems, certainly on Lakeshore Drive.
And this summer alone, rising water levels in Lake Michigan washed away 2 Chicago beaches, including Juneway Beach Park in the Rogers Park neighborhood. Juneway Park Beach here was open just a few months ago. It recently closed due to the rising lake levels. There are gates up now and you can no longer get close to the water because the levels have continued to push back, causing this bridge here to collapse. And experts tell me that events like this with beaches washing up will become more frequent due to increased heavy rainfall here in the Midwest. Andrew Ruskowski is a longtime resident of Rogers Park and says the city has started planting along waterfronts to prevent other beaches in the area from disappearing.
I think they're trying to reclaim the beachfront though with like that sedge grass, like they're planting that grass there to kind of keep the beach there.
Experts say native planting or landscaping with plants that naturally adapt to the local climate are part of the solution to reduce the impacts of flooding.
You need native landscape to try and absorb the rising water, the flood water. Usually those native plants have very long root systems and they just absorb the water better than non-native plants. So that's the kind of thing we need to be doing.
The increase in heavy rainfall this year also took a toll on crop growth for Midwest farmers.
That prevented farmers from planting on time. So they either got the crops in late or not at all. Some fields were actually bare this year. And a late start in muddy fields, that's not good for productivity. You don't get good root development. And so they just were behind all summer. And now we get into fall and some of the crops haven't matured yet. So there's the problem just have cascaded all through the growing season. So it's been a very challenging year this year.
Willard says for consumers, this means higher food prices.
The Midwest is the breadbasket of the world, or at least the United States. We'd like to think we're the breadbasket of the world, but it's certainly in the United States. And so when we have the kind of extreme flooding that we had last spring, what happens is the crops are going to be delayed, the planting of the crops, and they don't have the time that they need to reach maturity, their natural growth cycle, and consequently you lose a lot of the crop, and crops could go, the price of crops skyrocket.
The Chicago Mercantile Exchange reported that corn prices reached their highest in 5 years at over $4.50 per bushel. Dealing with the aftermath of flooding has also been a big expense for city taxpayers. A study by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources kept track of flooding-related costs from 2007 to 2014. And the city has reported that over $2 billion in flooding damages have been paid out as of 2017. And experts say as heavy rainfall events continue to become more frequent, that number is expected to rise. And heavier rainfall isn't the only impact we'll see. This past January brought bitter wind chills to Chicago, reaching -40 degrees, and these frigid temperatures could become more common. Polar vortex conditions in the Midwest are linked to warming temperatures in the Arctic. Warmer air disrupts the jet stream that normally keeps cold air near the poles.
And when that happens, then some of that cold air from the polar regions actually then drops down to places where it might not otherwise go, like Chicago. So instead of staying concentrated, we actually get these bursts of intense cold, sometimes with increased precipitation in the form of snow. And so this is actually an expected outcome of climate change. And so we expect that winters will be more intense with the breakdown of the jet stream.
Willard says it's important for people to understand that climate change is more than just heating.
More of that. And so we need to start to see more of that connection being made. People understand that's climate change as well. Climate change is not always heating. It can be freezing as well. It is just the way the climate changes.
A United Nations 2019 special report on climate change says that carbon emissions would have to be severely limited and fast within the next 10 years to avoid more serious impacts like increased threats to food security. Illinois Representative Robin Gable says governments should have been taking policy action decades ago.
I think that it is our future. We have been told that we have 10 years. And I think we need to take this incredibly seriously. We should have been doing this in the 70s. We didn't. If we had been addressing this much earlier, we wouldn't be in the state that we're in. And we are now in a crisis. And I feel like we have to be putting as much energy, our finances, and our time into addressing this problem.
Illinois is taking some steps to address climate change impacts. Governor J.B. Pritzker signed an executive order in January that commits the state to the goals of the Paris Climate Accord after President Trump announced a withdrawal from the international agreement. One of the main goals is to reduce carbon emissions by at least 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. And Illinois is currently on track to meet that. Gable says state and city governments should start taking their own more aggressive measures, which is why she supports the Clean Energy Jobs Act in Illinois, known as CEJA.
Now with CEJA, we really have a more ambitious plan. We hope to create 5 times as more renewable energy. We plan to have decarbonize the power sector by 2030. We'll focus on transportation pollution, and the most important part of it is that we will put jobs and equity at the center of our clean energy future.
Illinois lawmakers met last week for veto sessions held in Springfield, and CEJA is one of the high-profile legislation packages that fell behind. It won't be considered again until at least early next year, during the next session in January. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Erica Carbajal.